All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Delighted to be here. I'm Catherine Statler. I'm professor of history and the Element Chair for Collaborative Research at the Humanities Center. And I want to welcome you to a very special and prestigious event in our semester's programming. And that is, of course, the Knapp Lecture, delivered today by our distinguished guest, Dr. Mitchell Thomashow. The Knapp Chair, oh, that's moving. I'm gonna make sure I watch out for this, it moves. The Knapp Chair of Liberal Arts was established in 1995 by a generous endowment from the estate of Mary and Churchill Knapp of La Jolla, California, longtime supporters of the College of Arts and Sciences here at USD. Knapp Chairs are distinguished teacher scholars who are appointed by the dean and represent the arts and humanities, natural sciences and mathematics, and social sciences. The Knapp Chairs contribute to the vitality and centrality of liberal arts in the college by teaching and interacting with students, collaborating with faculty, and presenting public lectures, such as this one, that engage our campus community in confronting humanity's urgent challenges. And now, to introduce our current Knapp Chair, please welcome Associate Professor of Environmental and Ocean Sciences and Director of USD's Care of Our Common Home Pathway, Dr. Michel Boudry.
Thanks, Catherine. We're very lucky to have Mitch visiting us for the 12th, 13th time in the last decade or so. Met Dr. Thomashow when he came connecting early on in our efforts for sustainability on campus. And since then, he has come as a consultant, he's come as a lecturer. When we established the first pilot class for advanced integration, which was taught by Julia Kanzler, Mark Woods, and I, we had Mitch come for a week working with our students. And so it's interesting when Catherine mentioned the three areas for the Knapp Chair, I would say Mitch fits in all of them, which is an interesting perspective. He's written 5 books, and he was president of Unity College in Maine, wrote the book on college university sustainability. That's where we started our collaboration. What I really enjoy most are 2 things about Mitch. One is his strategic thinking, and that's one of the reasons why we've had him come visit USD. He's met with the president, he's met with the cabinet, he's met with several faculty to help us think about the future. And as I was telling him just this morning, I think his perspective of bringing the pieces together is what makes this person and this presentation unique. It's really crossing the disciplines. I think this book is the one that puts them all together. So I'm going to leave it all to Mitch to tell the story of To Know the World, a New Vision of Interdisciplinary Learning. Dr. Mitch Thomashow.
I did. I wanted to come through the curtain, but then I chickened out. It would have been too dramatic and distracting, but it would have been fun. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Michelle, for taking as much time as you have when it's been so busy for you. To organize things and to make me feel wanted and needed and connecting me to so many great people as you have. I'm really tremendously appreciative for your support and your inspiration and all of your many, many stories. Thank you, Noel and Brian as well. It's a great honor for me. I do not take these things for granted, ever. Anytime I have an opportunity, it matters tremendously to me at this stage of my career. This is a beautiful room. It's somehow I want to have a pipe organ behind me or something like that, but it is really, and again, for me it's new. I don't think I've ever, all the times I've been here, I've never been in this room. It's really quite lovely, and it brings up the whole level of the conversation. So this is what I'm going to do today. I wrote this book several years ago. I'm going to go through certain sections of it with you that I think are most important, both for the purposes of the Knapp chair itself and its designs and orientation, but also for this university. So I asked the question, how can we apply some of these things to the success, the future success and current success of the University of San Diego? I gave a talk to the cabinet in early April. This is an advanced version. An amplified version would be a more respectful way of putting it. This would be an amplified version of that talk, and I've added a few things as well. So what I've done is I've reconceptualized a lot of the concepts in this book and framed them around care for our common home. And that way it fits very well with your strategic mission and some of your own aspirations for how you move forward. Thank you, everyone, for being here, by the way. I don't take that for granted either. Thanks. I know you mentioned you're a community member. Thank you so much for coming, students and everyone else. I'm also very happy because the Mets won today. And thank you, Michelle, for, I know this wasn't intentional, but not scheduling anything this afternoon so I could deal with my, my fandom. Okay, let me get oriented here. There we go. I had it upside down. Let me take you back to 1968. I'm 74 years old, and back in 1968, there was no internet. And as some of you who at least know about that era, it was an amazing time. We had the civil rights movement, we had the women's movement, the environmental movement, and the anti-war movement. And so to be, I tell this to the students all the time, to be your age at that time was really something, because you were besieged on every conceivable level with opportunities and possibilities, and we really thought we were going to change the world in the most positive way imaginable. It was a very exciting time, not to mention the music and the cultural shifts that were all beginning to happen around then. So I was very heavily influenced by that, and because there was no internet, of course, that didn't happen for several decades later. What I used to love to do as a student at New York University, where there were no environmental studies courses at all. In fact, I need to remind folks all the time that in the late 60s, early 70s, there were no environmental studies programs. You could take an ecology course somewhere, or maybe get a PhD in ecology, often at a school of forestry, or maybe in some natural science school somewhere. But the whole field of environmental studies, which we now take for granted, has happened over the course of my lifetime. And I'm part of a whole generation of people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who have built this field. And most of my career has been building the field of environmental studies. And on the side, I've written books. But really, my main work has been to develop programs where there were none before. And that's been a very exciting thing to do, in collaboration with so many people. It led me to administration, which was never anything I ever intended. But so often you wind up in administration because people trust you, or because there are things that you want to do that you know only you can do. And that's what winds up happening. Anyway, back to my story, and then I'll actually get on with the presentation. But I want to tell you more about myself and where I come from and who I am and what matters to me before I get launched. So I used to go to, I was 18 years old, I used to go to the first car of the subway, because New York University at that time had a campus in the Bronx. I'm from New York originally. And yeah, I get a little stoned and such, but I shouldn't have said this if this is being broadcast on YouTube, but I guess it doesn't matter, it's legal now, right? So, and I go to the first car of the subway, because you'd have this light show as you went underground. There were all these different colors, it was really fun. But my destination was either to see one of the bands that were coming over from England for the first time, or from the West Coast, but to go to the 8th Street bookstore, which no longer exists. Because I was so excited to learn more about all these movements and the context for all of them. And one day I saw this book. How many of you have seen this book before? Okay, well, that's a generational thing. And I saw that book, and it was high on a shelf somewhere, and in the parlance of the day, I said, like, wow, what is that? And it was the Whole Earth catalog with a picture of the Earth on the cover. So I bought the book, and I brought it back with me to my apartment. And I flipped through it, and I said, this is what I want to do. This is what matters to me. This is, can I somehow learn? I wanted to read every book that was mentioned in the Whole Earth catalog. I wanted to explore everything that was in it. And then there'd be other whole earth catalogs that would come out. But in retrospect, to me, this is the origins of intellectual sustainability and practical sustainability in North America, because this book really led the way. And there's a lot of literature, by the way, which writes about this. So that's what got me started. And then I founded a master's program in environmental studies at Antioch, New England in 1975. And along the way, I wrote a bunch of books, and these are three of them. And I want you to see the sequence of how this works. My first book came out in 95. It was called Ecological Identity, still in print, actually. And I was really interested in why people choose an environmental way of life, and how does that change the way they think about politics, the natural world, spirituality. And this book covers a lot of those things. And the term for it that I developed was ecological identity. Then in 2001, I wrote this book, which I think is relevant today as the day it was written. I was dismayed by a few conferences I went to which looked at the sixth mega extinction, and a concept which had really emerged in the 90s through a lot of the biodiversity scientists. And I was really interested in, as an educator, is if it's so hard to understand this, how can we as educators help folks understand these huge global biosphere level challenges? And so the theory in that book, essentially, is if you can be more observant of what happens right in front of you, of local natural history, then from that local natural history, you can expand in space and time to see broader considerations. For example, if you know that the bird singing right outside your window is a phoebe, and it may be nesting there, then maybe you will also know that it comes a few days earlier the next spring. So you can't notice any of those changes until you understand what's right in front of you. So I cover that in this book. And I also cover some of the existential challenges that are intrinsic to thinking about human-nature relationships and all that goes with it. And then the 9 elements of a sustainable campus was 2013. After my presidency, I was very interested in putting together a template, a strategic template for any college or university, or for that matter, any campus that wants to move in this direction. So those are the 3 major books, and there's another one as well, which I don't need to get into right now. But this last work, To Know the World, essentially is part of a trilogy. This was, I wouldn't say it's an aberration because, I mean, it was an important book to me. But this book, To Know the World, is a continuation of the first 2. Every time I give a talk, I like to remind people where we are, what place we're at. And I'm going to conclude this talk as well by looking at where we're at right now. But this is really a beautiful, I joke often that this reminds me of a marble I had as a child, but there's something about the sphere and the circle and the planet and this magnificent orb unfettered by human settlement, not to romanticize what it was like before then, but it's really a beautiful system. I mean, an absolutely beautiful, beautiful system. And I also like to remind people that the reason why we have environmental studies programs is because we're in the midst of a major challenge, a planetary emergency of sorts, and I like to review very briefly what that planetary emergency is. And there are 4 themes. The most important one of all is the 6th mega, well, these are all connected, the 6th mega extinction. Those of you who study environmental science know that there have been 5 mega extinctions during the history of life on Earth. One of the great, I think, accomplishments of human intellectual awareness is the fact that we figured this out. We are now in number 6. What's interesting about number 6 is that it's anthropogenic, that is, it's caused by humans. So it raises not only ecological questions, but existential and spiritual questions as well, hence care for our common home. There's also, obviously, the plunging declines in biodiversity. I mean, you look no further than the growth of this city and what might have been here, how it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, and so on. And this is all, of course, accelerated by rapidly changing atmospheric, oceanic, and atmospheric circulations, which is another way of talking about climate change, but it broadens climate change to help us understand that these are all circulations. We can go back and see this again. These are remarkably interesting circulations that have been accelerated in various respects in what are described as no analog patterns. That is, we can go through the history of life on Earth, and it's very hard to find the rapidity through which the changes are occurring right now in paleo environments of one kind or another. But this is all connected, the oceanic circulation, the atmospheric circulation. You need to look no further than hurricanes to understand this. And then the biogeochemical imbalances. The one we talk about most frequently is carbon and then water, but there are many others as well. So this is it, just to review this, not to get anyone depressed. It's actually, you can say, what an interesting time to be alive, to be witness and observing all these rapid changes. But this is the issue. This is why we have a sustainability movement. We don't do it just to check off boxes and become stars, gold, or platinum, whatever the heck it is. We do it because we're dealing with a problem and a question. That's why we reconceptualize curriculum on college campuses. That's why we have environmental studies majors. That's why we need to broaden the meaning of environmental studies, and that's why I wrote the book, To Know the World. To Know the World has 9 chapters. I am not going to go through the whole book with you. I am going to focus mostly on chapters 5 and 6, which is constructive connectivity and migration, because I think those are incredibly pertinent for this university. I'm going to look a little bit at the tides of change and a little bit at perceptual reciprocity. Each one of these represent 4 aspects of what I consider to be care for the common home, care for our common home. So that's the plan of what I'm going to do. I want to start with the tides of change, and this is care for our common home. The language that we usually use to describe this is environmental justice. Strategically speaking, that's not always the best language. Because people immediately think, oh, you're talking about this, you're talking about that, you're talking about this, you're talking about wokeness. Well, not really. What we're talking about are 4 fundamental questions that are crucial to our times. And also, my position is that environmental studies, to be relevant, has to cover these things. And other fields, to be relevant, have to think about environmental studies. So that's the interconnectedness that's so important. Number 1, condition 1, the rapacious exploitation of the biosphere and its life systems. How do we best communicate the necessity of ecosystem thinking? That's been a challenge that's been at the heart of environmental studies education for my whole lifetime. Number 2, the increasing disparity between rich and poor. How do we promote economic equity and social justice in cultures of materialism and entitlement? And I think that is the bottom line statement of question, really, of what we're thinking about with these issues. Obviously, they're at stake in elections and in a variety of other domains. Third, that's what's typically talked about as equity in the whole DEI discussion. Third, the apprehension concerning the integration and separation of global cultures. How do we promote intercultural understanding and cosmopolitan thinking in the midst of nationalist responses and ethnic chauvinism? If that's not at the heart of all of our current dilemmas, I don't know what is. This is the question that breeds demagoguery and always has. So this is very important, and you are an institution that can make, I think, major progress in helping us understand this question. And finally, 4th, violence, weapons, and terror compete with deliberation, diplomacy, and collaboration. How do we settle our differences through community democracy, compromise, and service in the midst of conflict, extreme behavior, and fear? This is what I see. These are the 4 questions of our lifetime. If education is going to be pertinent, both environmental studies and liberal arts education, if these questions are not asked in various ways, then I don't think that the education is all that worthwhile, honestly. And I think a new liberal arts, a reconceptualized liberal arts, ought to be focused on these things. That's what I believe. So, environmental concerns are connected to these pertinent issues: economic opportunity, social justice, healthcare. You can read it. But these are hard connections to make, and that's the role of learning, and that's the role of education. That's, to me, the future of environmental learning, which is why a vision for the future of environmental learning is the subtitle of To Know the World. But here are some questions for you to think about in terms of wherever you sit within this university or in the world. What is the role of environmental studies in making these connections more clear? What is the role of higher education? What are the leadership opportunities for USD? How does care for our common home address these issues? What guidance do we get from Laudato Si? What's remarkable about Laudato Si, and I say this as someone of Jewish background, is that it is, in fact, a document that looks at these questions. All the concerns that I raised in the previous slide are covered in Laudato Si. It's really quite remarkable, and it's an amazing, amazing document. And it's great that this institution has done its best to move forward with some of the main principles of it. So I congratulate everyone who's involved in that. But You know, it's like I used to say when I was president of Unity, we're getting better, but we're not good enough. And I think that's true with how we think about Laudato Si in this institution. You're doing well and you're getting better, but it's not quite good enough yet. Another brief interlude before I get into the main body that I want to focus on, which is networks and migration. I asked the question in chapter 4 of the book, is the Anthropocene blowing your mind? And I want to say a little bit more about that, because these are the conditions of the world that we live in, and we need to understand what those conditions are. So the word Anthropocene has gotten some play, academic play, and basically the conceit of the notion of Anthropocene is that there have been so many dynamic changes over the last, name it, 500 years, 2,000 years. People put the origins of the Anthropocene in different eras. But regardless of when you do that, academics can parse anything. The idea is that there are so many changes taking place right now that is worthy of a title as a new geological era. There, I got that out. So but the Anthropocene to me is two different mutually conducive trends that are not often linked, and I want to link them. The global extraction of natural resources, well, we know about that, and you can look at any kind of graph and see how that happens. But the intensity of electronic connectivity, because what the electronic connectivity does is by the way, electronic connectivity takes up a tremendous amount of energy. Just read any of the very interesting books that point this out about AI and such, and what servers, the energy that they take up. But it's perceptual changes that I'm interested in and that I think a lot about. And what we are now in the midst of is a dynamic reconditioning of human perceptual awareness. And I don't mean to make fun of anybody or anything, because I do this sometimes too, but if you walk around campus, this is what you see. Now, I can't do this because I'll trip and fall. When you're 74, you don't want to do that. But this is what you see. Now, not everybody, but a lot of people. And the question then becomes, is there anything wrong with this? Well, not on the face of it. I mean, we are apes with opposable thumbs that want to keep up with the latest gossip, from one perspective. But from another perspective, this does change how you perceive the world, because everything gets telescoped into this. I'm going to say a bit more about that in a moment. So the challenge for all of us, and I think this is behind a lot of the political shenanigans and uncertainties of our time, is how do we reclaim autonomy in a time of global transformation? I think it's on everyone's mind, is what does it mean to be autonomous? So I get into this at some length in the book. I look at the whole notion of autonomy and what it means in these times, but not right now. I just want to raise it with you. Then this could be a time of human awakening, because the fact of the matter is these technologies, there's a lot to be said about this. Maybe I'll get to it later. These technologies broaden our observational capacities in ways that are unprecedented and really, really interesting. So they're a mixed bag. But they also can bring you down a rabbit hole of sorts, and I'm going to say more about the rabbit hole in a minute. So these are some of the additional trends that impact the future of environmental learning. This is all still a prologue to the main body of what I'm going to discuss. We live in an urban planet. If I look at my year of birth, 1950, and then project out to 2050, we'll have moved from 20% of the planet being urban to 80% over 100 years. That's a pretty exceptional statistic. It's roughly that. I mean, it's a gross statistic I'm giving you. We live in a world it's a cosmopolitan culture, and nothing we can do to change that. No walls, nothing we'll do will change the fact that we live in a cosmopolitan culture, which is why migration studies are so important. The ecological equity and social justice issues are the foundation and grassroots of environmental activism. They have been for a while, and they will continue to be so. Information networks and new cognitive orientations change so rapidly, and they must be studied and understood, especially not only in colleges, but in K through 12. And it's really important that we are able to balance openness and vigilance. On the one hand, I think that we need to be as open as possible to multiple points of view. On the other hand, there will people who will take advantage of that and will stab you behind your back. So especially in these times. So there's all of this that's going on. I'm setting the table, in a sense. This is my view of our current era, what's pertinent, what matters, and what we need to be thinking about. And again, the last little prelude to talk about this whole notion of looking at the box. Well, that on the upper left was my desktop at one point in time, And it's very easy to spend a lot of time in the morning working on that desktop and exploring all the places that it takes you. It's fun, you get dopamine hits, you learn a lot. I wrote most of my book by just doing research from sitting in my comfortable chair and kind of, going through the rabbit hole. And I think I have autonomy. I think I'm controlling where I go, and I'm very well aware that it's being watched all the time by some kind of AI or algorithm that's then going to be directing ads my way. But how do we teach about this? And then I come out of it and I go back to my office, which is on the bottom left, and I realize that the upper left is a portal of sorts, and my whole office is a portal. Every one of those boxes, every one of those books is an opening. It's kind of a virtual as well. It's a virtual opening. I feel I like it better, and I have more of a history with it, but every one of those books is an opening to another world. And then finally I said, I've had enough of all of this. I'm going to go outdoors. When I go outdoors, the whole world opens up. And my perceptual capabilities open up in ways that they can't possibly be available to me in those other domains. I'm going to return to this at the very end of the slideshow. So what I'm doing is I'm just throwing a lot of stuff at you. And any one of these slides could be a talk in and of itself. There's so much here. And my pedagogy would be to ask other folks to come up with some of their own responses and do some writing or thinking about it. But we don't have 100 hours. We just have an hour. So I'm trying to just show you all the different things that are part of this orientation. This is my son's work, our son's work, by the way. He's a mural artist in Tasmania, and I love this because it is human reflection in a very disturbed environment looking back upon itself. And I do think art is a really important way to get a lot of these theoretical issues across. Part of that whole advanced integration, Michelle, art enables us to juxtapose time and space in ways that sometimes it's very hard for non-scientists to do. So now I'm going to look at the two main themes. I'm going to do a time check. And the first one is what I call constructive connectivity, and this is part 2 of Care for Our Common Home. And what I mean by constructive connectivity will be clear as I go through this, but the idea is how do we enhance ecological and social networks simultaneously? That, for anyone who may be wondering, does anyone know what that is, that picture? You do because you were there. Does anyone know what this is? This is Promontory, Utah. This is the Golden Spike. This is where the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. And that was a pretty important thing because what that meant is that you wanted to ship goods or people back and forth from the East Coast to the West Coast. You could do it in, well, at that time it was probably a week, as opposed to going all the way around the southern tip of South America, all the way up to San Francisco, which took several months. So this was a network, a really important network event. Shortly after the Civil War, shortly after the publication of The Origin of Species, in the 1860s, 1867, this happens. And after this happens, things start moving really fast back and forth. But this whole notion of networks and the transportation of goods begins to become much more prominent. There's a lot more to say about the steam engine and Darwin and research and all of this, but again, beyond the scope of what we can cover right now. So what I like to do when I teach, and well, there should be a question mark there, oh, that's just because we went from Keynote to PowerPoint. You can think about this. A network is a series of intricate pathways that facilitate the flow of information, energy, and matter. And I like to ask folks in a teaching situation, what networks engage, surround, and embody your world? And then how do you engage in constructive connectivity? And here's what I mean by that. I like to start by thinking about biosphere network archetypes, the networks that surround us on the biggest conceivable level, and see the patterns inherent in them. So here we have, well, tree roots, we have mycelial relationships. Paul Stamets, the great mushroom visionary, describes mycelium as the world's first internet, the original internet, and then dendritic drainage. But these are all very interesting patterns, and there are some great books that show the relationship between these patterns, which are both biological and physical phenomena, and way above my pay grade to understand, but nevertheless I can appreciate the aesthetics of them. And one of the biggest growing areas in ecological research is like ecological network analysis, because what we're learning now is that these types of webs, whether it's a food web, any of the kind of nutrient exchange webs, are not only important in space, but they're also important in time. So depending upon what time you measure these interrelationships in an ecosystem, in a 24-hour day, in a 24-day cycle, in an annual cycle, in a 10-year cycle, the relationships, the network relationships are going to be very different, both spatially and temporally. And we're first beginning to get a grip on how important that is in terms of understanding it. And then, of course, the patterns. You can name these patterns. They're so interesting. And how they work and which ones are impactful. And again, way beyond the scope. I just want you to enjoy with me the beauty of these extraordinary ecological network patterns that you can learn more about if you so choose. This is from a very interesting website called the Mycomythologies Storytelling Circle that looks at narratives that surround mycelial relationships. Mushrooms are a big deal right now. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a tremendous interest in revitalization of mushrooms because of the potential and the sentient possibilities that way precede human affairs. And then this is a very interesting one as well, because you can see the interesting parallel between a root system on top and then, on the bottom, and then the branch system, and then the microbial relationships that move nutrients back and forth. All of this happens beneath our feet, which is absolutely fascinating to me. How do you see these things that are otherwise unseen? And then we can go even further and look at organisms. And this is an interesting stylized diagram of pelagic seabirds and the incredible amount of ground that they cover. And it is really quite remarkable, thousands and thousands of miles in one season. But you can see that these are networks related to where food sources are. A brilliant evolutionary adaptation. I'm going to get more to evolutionary adaptation and migration in a moment. And of course, galaxies and neurons have these things too. This is a very frivolous comment, but one of the more recent Star Trek Discovery, they discover some kind of spore power or something like that, and they figure out how to use some kind of organism to move between entire solar systems. And the name of the chief scientist on this enterprise is Stamets, which comes after the great mushroom guy. So I'm just fascinated by all of these things that we barely understand, but the patterns are there. You can see the patterns and you can see the relationships. Look at the energy network infrastructure. Now, if you really study this thing, again, we're not going to do it right now, you can ask the question, well, where is this stable and where is this secure? If you look at it regionally speaking, how do you create an energy structure that can withstand, let's say, horrible hurricanes, catastrophes in general, or earthquakes? There are ways of doing it, but not the way they're currently set up. So network analysis is fundamental in a variety of different ways. And then we go to social network analysis, and what's interesting about some of these, this is from the world of sociology, which has a whole nother literature around social network analysis, which I cover a little bit in the book, and at least refer to the literature. But there are many different ways of organizing social network relationships. And what we've learned, especially in the current era, is that most people tend to gravitate towards homological networks, which are like-minded people. So you're mostly going to be in a network of people who think similarly to yourself. But what we also know from organizational development theory and from sociological theory is that the most creative people are the people who are nodes in networks that connect these homological networks. So that ought to be a part of, I think, any teaching and any instruction in terms of how we think about social networks. And you can think about all these things in your own life. By the way, one of the things that I've done in various institutions, ranging from the Harvard Sustainability Office, which has 22 staff, to other places, is I ask folks to develop a network analysis of where they are. And then they take an hour and they put it all down and they put it in newsprint around, and I ask, well, where are you strong and where are you not? What are the places where you feel you need to be that you aren't? And you can do this with individuals, you can do this with communities, with organizations, and it's really eye-opening and a lot of fun to do because it brings some art into it. So this is, I did a Google image of social networks, and this is what I came up with. It's pretty complex and very interesting, but you can do it for yourself, and you'll learn a lot by doing something like this. And organizations learn a lot by doing these sorts of things. I mean, you know, you could do it for the USD sustainability networks and ask, well, where are we? Where are we on campus? Where are we in the community? Are we where we're supposed to be? All these years later, we've been doing this. Have we plateaued? Are we making are we taking the steps that we need to be taking at this point in time? And one way of understanding that is to look at where your networks are and where they've been effective and where they need to be better. So I do a lot with educating for constructive connectivity, and I have a whole sequence for how you do it. You have to identify the type of network, the scale of the network, visualizing and mapping what it looks like, where are the important connections, where is the movement, where are the paths and flows. This is a very interesting thing to do about organizational life. And then these important questions, sourcing, where does information come from? In the era of misinformation, where is the information coming from in your network, and how does it flow from one place to another? And with all the artificial intelligence and all the misinformation and Putin's agents doing not just his, but all over the place doing these kinds of things, how do you know where your information is coming from? But also, how do you browse different multiple networks for your own purposes? And how do you curate these things? I think these are fundamental. What are the connections that matter in building social capital, community trust, ecological understanding, and human flourishing? Now, I'd love to see more coursework at K through 12 and at the undergraduate and graduate level that works on these sorts of things. So, challenges for USD, from a curricular point of view, how can constructive connectivity, social media analysis, social networking excellence, social capital development, et cetera, become intrinsic to the core curriculum? And how does this help us think through the future of the liberal arts at an institution? How does it help us think through the majors that are in slow decline around the country? Maybe they are here, I don't know. But where are there ways that we can use these sorts of questions to revitalize some of the majors and make them come alive in ways that use the traditional disciplinary knowledge and standards, but take it to a whole new level? Administrative questions, how do you further integrate care for the common home into all aspects of alumni relations, public relations, academic branding, faculty development, and donor prospects? And then my suggestion is that you use network analysis maps, faculty clusters, alumni centers and initiatives, partnerships to begin to do some of this kind of work. And this is what I said to the cabinet when I met with them for half an hour. And the thing is, everyone said, yeah, that's great, but you know what happens, the inertia of administrative life and everything else begs the challenge of continuity. And I understand why that happens and how it should happen. So maybe if I say it over and over again, it'll begin to have meaning in a different kind of way. So that's part two. Now part three, I'll do a quick time check here. To me, migration is the most pertinent environmental question of our time, has been for a while and will continue to be so, because this is, and I've tried to make the case at USD, and I'm going to do this now with you, that this is a leadership potential for you, because we're not getting any leadership from the government on this and from politicians, because it's just become so emotionally ripe for demagoguery on both sides. And we don't get any leadership from the press. And there are very few universities that have really stepped up and developed these sorts of programs. There are some, but not very many. And you are a border institution. So I think this is a really interesting opportunity, certainly for the College of Liberal Arts, but all the different colleges that are here at University of San Diego. But let me go back in time a little bit and give you my spiel on migration. Everything on the planet moves. There's a wonderful book by a guy named Thomas Nail. It's a very academic book called The Theory of the Earth. And he has this theory of the Earth that's all built on flow and movement, from the origins of the Earth to the present day. He's also written a book on migration called The Figure of the Migrant. Very interesting guy, not very well known outside his particular field of philosophy. He's a philosopher. But yes, everything is moving all the time. So you just look at continental drift. Well, guess what? The continents are moving. And evolution, the history of evolutionary ecology suggests that species must move to be able to survive under these changing circumstances. So migration is intrinsic to biosphere phenomena. It's just the way this planet works and always has. And you can get more specific and current about it by look at the summer and winter breeding areas of various whales. You could look at phenological diagrams. This, by the way, is a flow diagram that has movement, but I don't know how to do that. It's too sophisticated for me. So, but this is a diagram of the movement of birds, mammals, and amphibians in springtime. And it's very dynamic. Just watch, migrating birds or migrating dragonflies or migrating butterflies. Most species migrate in one sense or another. And this shows you how entire biogeographies will change. If you look at the diagram on the left, it looks at the tree associations mainly in the recent past and what's projected in the future. On the right, we see the migratory route of the monarch butterfly. Every time I see a monarch butterfly, I saw one the other day, I think about this amazing diagram. They do it over several generations, really quite remarkable, and humans migrate. There's only 20,000 humans that somehow made their way out of Africa, and it didn't take them long to cover the entire planet. It didn't take them long at all. In fact, now we're learning that there were settlements in North and South America way earlier than we originally thought. So this is another very interesting aspect of human migration. The only walls then were topographical. World migrations, since 1500. All those people that came from Europe, all those people that were transported here by the slave trade from Africa, all those people that came from Asia. And of course, it's not just between North America and other parts of the world. It happens throughout the entire world. So it's so interesting when we want to send people back. Well, okay. And then if you look more specifically at the first great migration of African Americans from the South and then the second great migration, you see that there are all these movements that take place in this country. They're very dynamic movements. They change the entire history of America. Now look at the exodus after Katrina. This shows you where people went. The darker colors is where people go. We can do these for the current storms. It's very interesting. I'm going to say more about storms and migration in a moment. And this map simply shows, again, as I say, all these maps are very deep and there's a lot you can think about. But they show where the largest ancestries are of various Americans. And so this is, of course, post-colonial. These are post-colonial relationships, and it's important to point that out. This very interesting circle diagram shows you the movement of people between, I think it's 2010 and 2015. I don't remember exactly, 2005 and 2010. And I like this diagram because we often think, oh, it's all between Central America and the United States. No, it's not. That's just a very small percentage of people that are on the move all the time. Yet we build walls, and this is a depiction of so many of the walls that have been built in recent history, and borders and boundaries of various sorts, impenetrable borders and boundaries. And here's a picture of some of them. But these are ephemeral artifacts. They can't last. There's no way they can. Species find a way to move anyhow. These things crumble over time. They're not very helpful. I'm not saying there should be open borders, by the way. The whole question of borders and who comes in and who goes is a very complicated one. I have my thoughts about that, which I won't reveal right now, but I just want us to have this historical biosphere perspective on these things. And this is a very interesting diagram of internal displacements, because migration is not just from one country to another. It's not just keeping people out of this country. It's what happens in this country. Well, where are all those people displaced from the latest storms going to go, or all the wildfires going to go, or the gentrification that takes place in these groovy, rich, wealthy, affluent cities everywhere around the country that displaces people from traditional communities who can't afford to live there anymore. So the question of displacement is internal as well as external, and it's really important to distinguish between the two of them, because in my view, what politicians should be talking about is how do we take care of all the internal displacements, and that is ignored entirely. And it could happen to you. I didn't have time to put together some slides of North Carolina, but we were in North Carolina because I had some work at Catawba College for 2 weeks. 3 days before the hurricane came. We were visiting with very good friends in Asheville, and they're okay, and 3 days later, that happened. And this is a place where it's not supposed to happen, 10 inches of rain. So no one's really protected from the possibility of these sorts of things, whether it's wildfires in the West or whatever. And I think this is also an interesting slide, too, because what this does is this demonstrates how, in fact, there are many major migration routes and most will be from the tropics toward temperate zones. But this is an interesting study in and of itself. And these are just contemporary migration routes. But if you do any of the, if you chart your DNA or any of that kind of thing, you'll find your own migration route, because every single person in this room is part of a very interesting and complex and intricate migration route. You go back 4 or 5 generations, and there is no purity, sorry. There's none whatsoever, because we're all mixtures of one kind or another. It's just a matter of how far you're willing to go back and ask that question. And I think that there are all kinds of wonderful people who are doing great work around refugees, and I wanted to show a sample of the various curriculum and things that are happening in that regard. And the literature that's come out is simply incredible. And I'm showing you all these books because I want to indicate why migration is the ultimate integration, advanced integration, in a sense. And look at, so we have The Next Great Migration, a wonderful book by Sonia Shaw, which looks at the philosophy of ecological theory and how it's intrinsically racist in some respects. And she does an amazing job of showing why that's true and how it manifests itself over the last century or so. Isabel Wilkerson's wonderful book on the African-American migration. How migration really works is a sociologist's view of these sorts of things. And he breaks down a lot of the myths, narratives about what it's like to live on a border, interviews with people who live on both sides. Ben Goldfarb's Crossings book, which is about what happens when a road is built and what happens to all the species that are now separated, is part of migration as well, because all these species migrate and they have a wall now, which is called a road. But we don't think about, when you build a road, how many species are you displacing as a result of that road, or a parking lot? The Earth Transformed is a very interesting environmental history of really all of human settlement over time. And you read that book, and really it's about migration and movement. Nuestra America is a wonderful narrative about a family, a Jewish family actually, that goes back and forth between Eastern Europe and Central America and the United States. And I love Encountering Difference, which talks about contact zones, the notion that there are places in every community where people do come together, and how do we work with them and make things happen. And finally, The Newcomers, another narrative, which is about a high school in Denver, which has lots of folks who come from other places, and how the brilliant teachers work with them and deal with them all. So I show you all of these because there are so many possibilities, and it's such an exciting area of study. And just a cursory, as an outsider, look at USD programs that hinge on all of this. The MS in Environmental and Ocean Sciences, MA in Peace and Justice, MA in Social Innovation, MS in Conflict Management and Resolution, MS in Humanitarian Action, all those other majors or minors. Cross-Border Initiatives Program, Water Justice Exchange, Environmental Integration Lab, specialized coursework, et cetera. And there may be a lot more than that. That's just my cursory review of some of the things that are here. So what does that say? It says you're already doing all of this, but probably it's not sufficiently branded or conceptualized. And that's something that I suggest can be done in such a way that you bring students in, you bring money in, and you exercise leadership as a border institution that's doing really important work in this regard. And you can all ask yourselves, well, are there ways that I can contribute to this possibility? This comes from when I was here in April, and I was just going through USD News. And these are just from one page of this. These are the stories that I saw that represent all the ways you're applying this kind of thing in the community. It's great. I mean, congratulations. It's awesome. So the challenges for USD is how might these programs create new synergies and clusters that provide unprecedented academic and civic leadership around migration, borders, and climate? What's the role of the university in providing such leadership, especially given the propaganda and misinformation surrounding these issues? Given its strengths and mission, what role can USD play in developing innovative academic programs? And I keep on knocking this darn thing. I'm running to the end of the hour. So this is the last theme, and I'm not going to go into it in quite as much depth. I gave a talk on this notion of perceptual reciprocity earlier in the week, and it has its own slideshow. But this is part 4 of Care for Our Common Home, in my view, and this is where some of the issues. This is where science and moral questions and spiritual questions all converge, in my view. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I mean by perceptual reciprocity and then conclude. So I start with etymology. What is perception? It's the organization, identification, and interpretation of sensory information. Perceptual ecology suggests using the senses. I went from Keynote to, I had to translate it to PowerPoint, so it repeats itself, to apprehend the interaction of organisms and their environment. That's now in there 3 times. And what is reciprocity? The ability to share, collaborate, find middle ground, and expand awareness by comparing what you see, perceive, and what you value to other perspectives. So perceptual reciprocity takes the position that every species on this planet perceives. That doesn't mean every species is sentient. That collectivities of species perceive, that maybe even habitats and landscapes perceive as well, but on a scale that we're not familiar with and we don't quite understand. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that we can learn a lot from observing the natural world. And we're not going to learn that when we're doing this. There's been an incredible spate of literature that's come out in the last 5 years that looks at all the different ways that other species perceive as a way of expanding the notion of what's possible. And again, I have a whole slideshow that goes over this in much more depth. It's very exciting and very interesting. And I love the fact that this is where the new natural history is taking us. It's taking us into the realm of the extraordinary awareness, observational awareness of so many different species on this planet. And think about the fact, this is the first map of North America, that all of these habitats have their own specific orientations and critters that have to adapt when they move from one to the other. These are all ideal types because, we do that, and it's fun. It's almost like a Venus, a paint by numbers kind of diagram, except you're painting in all those extraordinary different habitats. And look at this one. This is where you live. This is where we are right now. Think about the incredible diversity as you go from coast to cactus. That's the name of a really nice trail guide around here. And there's so much, and they're all different. And they all have their own evolutionary ecology and their own history. And on top of that, they have their own cultural history. And many of these tribal groups have knowledge, and indigenous ecological knowledge, that's lost to us as their language disappears. But they are discovering things that advanced technology is discovering as well. Not to value one over the other, but to simply say that this is an important aspect of our heritage too. You can look at it for all of North America. I'm not going to get into this chart right now. We do not have time, but it's a very interesting comparison of indigenous ecological knowledge and what Western science emphasizes. And you can see all the different ways that they interact and where one area may have, things to contribute to the other and vice versa. But I want to end with this quote or so. I think I have maybe 3 or 4 more slides. I love this. This comes from a wonderful book by Karen Backer called Gaia's Web. Another ethical teaching from indigenous knowledge holders emphasizes the importance of being in and belonging to particular places. Mohawk Anishinaabe scholar Vanessa Watts refers to this idea as place thought. Our words, concepts, and ideas emerge and are rooted in specific landscapes. The corollary follows that we want to engage in authentic communication with non-human beings. We also need to cultivate a relationship with the places and the ecological communities they inhabit. Other species may only be, intelligible to humans if we understand their umwelt, their lived embodied experience in the places in which they dwell. And that, to me, is part of care for our common home. So care for our common home is understanding the species in the place where we live and what they might contribute to our own well-being and flourishing. It's intercultural, it's intergenerational, and that, to me, is care for our common home. So what is perceptual reciprocity? It's a community-based effort requiring diverse perspectives. It's the collective memory of a place, not just here, but with the human stories, the fossil relics, the tree rings, the landforms, the shrines. If you know what you're looking for, there's a memory trace in every aspect of a landscape. But when we wipe out the landscape and we wipe out the languages, then those traces of memory are no longer there for us to witness and observe. The short-term memories of what happened yesterday with the long-term memories of people, species, and continents, this is the culmination of collective environmental learning. The best formula we have for ensuring thriving communities and flourishing ecosystems. And if I have a morality and a spirituality and an ethical orientation, it's based on this. That reciprocity implies exchange, sharing the perspectives and ideas of multiple peoples, generations, cultures, networks, features, and landscapes, finding a middle ground among those perspectives, encouraging empathy, dialogue, connectedness, kindness, generation, and love. And this is it. The generosity is sharing what is most precious to you and doing so with no exchange in mind. It's a gift of kindness and love. And to me, this is the ultimate perceptual, moral, and spiritual challenge. I have completed this presentation, and I hope I haven't worn you out as I've worn myself out, but I'm happy to take any kinds of questions. And I know I covered a lot of ground, but I wanted you to see the whole big piece, and I wanted to apply it to this institution. Thank you.